Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you happen to be located, and welcome to the Berklee Music Education and Special Needs Study Group. I'm Dr. Rhoda Bernard, the founding managing director of the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this really exciting online learning opportunity. We have been providing study groups of different sizes and shapes to a wide range of audiences and participants for a number of years. And this particular series, which is supported by a contract from VSA at the Kennedy Center, we've been providing for several years now. So we're very excited to see you all today, and we're getting underway, and we're really looking forward to our work together. With me today is Laura Howe. Laura is our fellow at the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs. Her focus is on our digital learning work, and her role today is that she is your digital guide. She will be able to watch the chat, make sure that Q&A works well, and sort of take care of the digital needs, and I will be taking care of your content needs for this session. So it's wonderful to be here. We are going to get started with a little bit of introduction to me and the work that we do at Berklee. It will be short, and then we will plunge right into our work on neurodiversity. And at the end of the session, we will do a lot of logistical work about the study group. Let me say a couple of logistical things right now off the bat to answer questions that might be in your minds. The slides will be made available to you as a PDF after the session. We will be sending out the video link to this session to all attendees. So the video link and the slides will go out probably on Monday because it takes some time for the videos to process. So you will have all of that available to you. There are other logistical components that we will talk about at the end of today's session. So thank you all, and I'm going to just plunge into our introduction. So let's introduce myself and our work a little bit to you. I'm not going to read this whole very long slide. Important things to know about me is that I sing and play the piano, and that I come to this work in arts education for people with disabilities from the perspective of access. When I was entering high school in a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts, a law went into effect that is still on the books today called Proposition 2.5, which, among other things, capped the annual increase in property taxes in any community to 2.5%. When that law went into effect, arts programs were eliminated in my school district. And it was only through very dedicated educators who said, we will teach you, but we can't do it at school, and we can't do it during the school day, and you can't pay us, but we want to continue your arts education. And it's only thanks to them that I was able to continue my arts education through high school. And having experienced a gap in my access to arts education and seeing how important that dedication was and how inspired I was by those teachers has led me to a career in bringing arts education to everyone. The work that we do at the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs began in 2007, 2008 at Boston Conservatory, where I was working at the time as the chair of graduate music education. I developed some programs, starting off with private instrument lessons for people on the autism spectrum. These programs grew and grew and grew, serve many more populations, allow us to do many more things. And then Boston Conservatory and Berklee College of Music merged in 2016, and we developed the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs. We spent a year planning and opened our doors September of 2017. So what do we do at the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs? We are a catalyst for the inclusion of individuals with disabilities in all aspects of visual and performing arts education. We have three main areas of our work. We have arts education programs for people ages 3 to 93. These are direct service programs, something like 9 or 10 music programs, 2 adaptive dance programs, and a theater program. All of this work is typically in person. We are now fully online with all of this work. And when we return to in person, we are going to continue the online work to reach farther than the Boston area. The second area of our work is that we have graduate and undergraduate courses and programs, notably 2 first of their kind and still only of their kind graduate programs in music education and autism. While our academic focus is autism, our service focus and our work goes to all disability populations. But those 2 graduate programs are a master's program and a graduate certificate program, both designed for working teachers. And then we do a whole lot of professional development initiatives like this and other things that we do. That's a link to our website. As I said, you'll be getting these slides. This is the list of the arts education programs that we currently offer. Everything from little classes for our very youngest students to private lessons. We give a lot of private lessons. We serve about 250 families every week in this whole array of programs. We have a summer camp program. Most of our programs meet on the weekends, on Saturdays. We are right now piloting bucket drumming and music technology, and we've got some other new pilots in the pipeline. One of our newer programs is our ukulele ensemble, which has been extremely popular and very effective. So you get a sense of some of what we do there. The graduate programs, as I said, focus on music education and autism, are the only programs of their kind in the world, have summer and evening courses during the academic year to accommodate a teacher's schedule, can be done at a distance and take about 2 years to complete. And we do a whole lot of professional development. In bold, you see information about our annual conference, the Able Assembly Arts Better the Lives of Everyone. It will be virtual April 10th and 11th. The theme of this year's conference is intersectionality, disability, and arts education. I will send our mailing list information about that conference because you really might want to attend. We've been working on a phenomenal program for that event. We have digital resources, including sessions like this, but also a resource center where educators can enter keywords and find lesson plans and rubrics and articles and books and materials to support their work. We convene a leadership network, and we do all kinds of presentations, workshops, consultations, you name it. Really aiming at sort of 2 ends of the issue, right? So providing arts education for people with disabilities, helping educators get the training and support that they need, and helping individuals receive the programming that they wish to receive. Before we get to our next presentation, I want to show you a quick video. It's going to take me a minute to get to the right thing. Please bear with me. Here. Laura, can we see that? Give me a thumbs up. Thank you. This is an introduction to our work. Hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities who love the arts and who need to be seen and heard and nurtured and accepted. We believe that arts education opportunities are super important for everybody in their lives.
We've worked with many students that have sung for the first time in our class, have spoken for the first time in our class, have taken first steps in our class. It's been a really rock star journey, I'm not gonna lie.
I have had kids in this class who can't say a word to me, but as soon as the hello song starts, they are matching pitch, they're inserting kids' names that they know. How can I meet those kids where they are by trying to enter their realm?
As parents of a kid with special needs, it's always this stress that they're going to be able to be independent, that they're going to be able to survive. To see that transform in what we see when he's performing, it's like, this is it. This is what really makes him a person.
When we began our work in 2007, we launched just private music lessons with individuals with disabilities, with autism, studying with graduate students from Boston Conservatory who received a lot of training and support. That led to first of their kind graduate programs in music education and autism.
My graduate students have skills that I've never seen in music educators before. They have the ability to create an education in a world for students with special needs and autism that is cutting edge.
by creating an institute, the Berklee Institute for Arts, Education, and Special Needs. It allows us to expand our programs beyond autism to other disabilities, and also to expand our work beyond music to other art forms.
It's been demonstrated scientifically that the arts are good for people. The arts help people do whatever it is they do better. The Institute is a fantastic addition to the work that we do.
This institute is demonstrating that people on the autism spectrum and with other special needs can learn. In doing so, we're often finding unexpected talent.
When Teresa started, she was 9 years old. She wouldn't speak very much. She could play very basic piano melodies, but she had perfect pitch. And now, to see her as a teenager, she'll speak to me in complete sentences, she can answer direct questions, she's able to make eye contact, huge social development.
And no matter how slow the progress is, they keep on believing in the value of that person, regardless of whether they have autism or whatever.
Teaching students on the spectrum is challenging in its own way, but it is so rewarding. Even though they may not pursue it as a career when they get older, I feel like I'm sparking a bit more passion.
I like to sing and act because it's my passion, especially in the recitals.
I still see my son, and then all of a sudden, he's ready for the performance, and then it's like a transformation. He's another person. He doesn't miss a cue, he doesn't miss a note. This is what really drives him.
The arts are an indispensable part of everyone's life. We want participation, we want exposure, we want experience. Berklee provides us with the opportunity to be all of those things in the local, national, and international communities.
I would recommend this program to anyone, even if you don't think that they have a love for the arts. Maybe that's what you need to do as a first step to find out.
You love music, you love the arts, come here. We will embrace you and we will celebrate what you can do. So that's a brief introduction to our work. Next, I'm going to share a new screen with our presentation for today. As I said, we'll get into that logistics at the end. Yes, all of the slides will be sent to you. So first, that is not what I want. Hang on. This is the challenge of PowerPoint. That's what I want. Okay. And there it is. Okay, thank you very much for bearing with that. I just want to play the slideshow, which we'll do right here. So, Laura, do we see Neurodiversity 1? Awesome. So we are going to talk about neurodiversity in this presentation. I have a lot to share with you. I'm very excited to share this information and get us thinking about neurodiversity. So to get a sense of what today's agenda is for this presentation, we're going to look at the concept of neurodiversity, its origins, the principles, its terms and definitions, and the implications of neurodiversity for educators and for society. Then we're going to look at models of disability, the medical model, the social model, and the affirmative model, and the implications of those for educators and society. So first, I'd like you all to we're going to give you about 2 minutes to write down on your own your thoughts. What do you know about neurodiversity? So we will actually wait 2 minutes for you to write down on your own thoughts about neurodiversity. Just a moment. Another minute just to jot down your quick thoughts. This is a way for us to sort of individually think about where we're starting today, and then we'll see where we get to today. Okay, so hold on to what you've written, and we'll come back to it at the end of this presentation. So we're going to talk first about the origin of the term neurodiversity. And most people ascribe the origin to Judy Singer and her thesis, where she created the term neurodiversity. And this little book that I'm holding is a publication of that thesis. So in the author's introduction, we learn that the chapter that she created based on her thesis is called "Why Can't You Be Normal for Once in Your Life? From a Problem with No Name to the Emergence of a New Category of Difference." And this is really important because the definition of neurodiversity and the whole idea of neurodiversity stems from Judy Singer's personal experience. And as you'll find out, this exclamation, "Why can't you be normal for once in your life?" is what Judy Singer used to say and want to say to her mom when she was growing up. So Judy Singer argues that just as we have race, class, and gender, and she's speaking in 1998, so she's speaking about those categories as they were thought of in 1998. We, of course, think about those categories very differently today, but that she believes that there should also be neurologically different, that it should be the same kind of identification as someone who might say where they identify in terms of class, for example. So she wants to help us understand that everybody does not see, feel, touch, hear, smell, or sort information in the same way. So she sees around her in 1998 a world where people assume that everybody intakes and sorts information through their senses and cognitively in the same way. And she's saying that's not true. And that's where she came up with this idea of neurodiversity. The movement is a postmodern phenomenon. Instead of essentialist definitions, really understanding the wide range of individual variation and how that affects people's interpretations of the world around them, right? So in her view, the neurodiversity movement is a civil rights movement. In her mind, in 1998, the world is set up in such a way that individuals who think differently, perceive information differently, sort information differently, do not have the same rights and the same opportunities as other people, and that there are basic civil rights that are denied to those individuals, and that there should be a civil rights movement. And I would argue that the work that she's done has set up a very strong series of movements in neurodiversity, in disability rights, which was going on earlier than that and has continued, in disability justice, which is somewhat newer. So I think that she has a very strong argument here. So she has several big points. And one big argument she wants to make is that up until 1998, she was noticing that individuals who think differently would receive diagnoses and would be considered to have psychological challenges. And she's saying that's not what this is about. It's not a psychological challenge that needs therapeutic intervention. Neurodiversity is hardwired neurological differences. Which means it is genetic, it is part of who a person is and how their particular brain happens to work. This speaks against the idea that it would be a personality flaw that would be that person's fault. Or, and yes, this was the argument, a psychological problem caused by bad parenting. Many of you may be familiar with the refrigerator mother argument that was made about autism in particular in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where autism at that time, and many people argued this throughout the medical profession, was believed to be caused by, and I should really do air quotes around caused because there is no cause for autism, but was believed at the time to be caused by poor parenting and particularly cold mothers. This, of course, was a reaction to the fact that in those days, women were entering the workforce more. And there was a struggle around women entering the workforce, and they and their poor parenting was blamed for children having autism. It's fascinating that Temple Grandin grew up in that context, but her mother had a very different attitude and fought really hard to make sure that Temple received the educational opportunities that she needed to grow, which is incredible. So again, in Judy's words, that she sees that the categories of disability that existed up to 1998 were physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and psychiatric disabilities. And high functioning autism, which is the phrase that she was using at the time, we now don't use the words high functioning or low functioning. In this country, in the US, we now use low support needs and high support needs instead, because this notion of high and low functioning has a valence and a judgment and a value system to it. But anyway, back in her time, high functioning autism didn't fit in those categories. For decades, it had been considered a psychiatric disability, but that is not accurate. So she was proposing a new category to be disabilities of social communication. And there we go. So as I said earlier, her personal history is what drew her to this inquiry. She did not know it at the time, nor did her mother know it at the time, but her mother had high functioning autism. So Judy grew up in a household with a mom who had high functioning autism that was not diagnosed. So that shaped her early experiences. Then Judy Singer becomes an adult and notices that her own daughter is not developing normally and ends up being diagnosed with autism herself. And as Judy gets more and more knowledgeable about autism, she recognizes traits of high functioning autism that she has. So we have 3 generations of women with autism in Judy Singer's family. So what did Judy Singer do? She joined online discussion groups and created a particular online discussion group for individuals whose parents have autism. But she created community where there was none. Now, this is 1998. So online discussion groups are not at all where they are today, right? But for individuals on the autism spectrum, these online communities have been very important in developing a sense of community, in finding people whose experiences they share, and making meaningful social connections and advocacy and movement and connections as well. So what she's saying here is she was trying to push the envelope by thinking about high functioning autism in a positive way, to see a neurodiversity revolution as potent as the feminist revolution had been. That if we could think about a new type of human and a new level of human capability when it comes to high functioning autism. She was also thinking about her experiences as a child, her experiences as being a daughter, her experiences being a mother. If the environment had been different, she wonders, could her experiences have been different? So the online support group that she created was called ASPAR. At the time, more than 200 people passed through the group, and it was a very highly active group. And Judy got burned out from that and shut the group down after having moderated it for quite some time. What they shared were traumatic effects of being raised by a parent with autism. And I think this quote from page 21 of this text is particularly poignant. Even though most of us recognized early that our parents were not intentionally cruel and neglectful, the effect was as painful as if they had known what they were doing. So when you're a kid, you don't know, the effect feels the same, whether you understand the intention or not. It still feels as though they were treated cruelly and neglectfully. So this new category of neurodiversity is really important. New communities, particularly through technology, and trying to bring autistics and what she's calling NTs or neurotypicals together. And I love this quote at the bottom, to imagine the kind of society in which NTs and autistics can interact in mutual respect for each other's differences, gifts, and deficits, where communications protocols have been worked out between what are almost different ontological languages, different words of body language and expression. So she's trying to say that she's looking to build a world someday where we can reach across the different ways of communication. We can reach across our limited understandings and develop a society of mutual respect for the differences, the gifts, and the deficits that all of us have. Very, very powerful when you think about the concept of neurodiversity. This is my favorite slide in the whole presentation that I'm going to give the entire day. And yes, you are getting copies of the slides, but this is my favorite slide, because it lays out a contrast that she talks about in her chapter that is profoundly important. On the left-hand side of the slide, she lists what have been noted by many, many people when they define autism. What do they say? These are, of course, people without autism defining autism. They will refer to things like a lack of empathy, naive, inappropriate, one-sided interactions, little or no ability to form friendships, pedantic, repetitive speech, poor nonverbal communications, intense absorption in specialized subjects, clumsy and ill-coordinated movements and odd postures, unusual prosody, accents, voice control, insistence on sameness, obsessive routines, an absence of an innate theory of mind, that is a theory of how other minds work. So a lot of things to notice about this list. One thing to notice about this list is that almost everything on that left side of the slide is phrased in a negative way. A lack, inappropriate, no ability, right? Clumsy, you see this. Obsessive, negative language, right? Which is an issue to begin with. It also is taken from a neurotypical perspective, right? Neurotypicals have, people with autism do not have, right? Because when you say lack of empathy, the implication is neurotypicals have empathy. One-sided inappropriate interactions, neurotypicals interactions are appropriate. So there's this real assumption here around the haves and the have-nots, if you will, around those conventional definitions. And this is, of course, from the outside looking in, because these are what neurotypical people say about people with autism. If you ask people with autism what autism is like, and what Judy Singer says here jives with my own informal conversations with the many people I know on the autism spectrum. When I ask them, what does it feel like to have autism? What is autism like? This is what they will tell me in Judy's words. And this is the right side of the slide. a hypersensitivity to sensory stimuli, which necessitates a withdrawal from the world of overwhelming sensation. In other words, being bombarded by disorganized, overwhelming sensory input. It's not sorted. It's not which is foreground and which is background. It's all big and it's all coming at you all at once, and it's quite overwhelming. This is what people on the spectrum tell me as well. Nowhere in our list on the left do we see that, right? There's no understanding of that. Neurotypicals do not understand this. And when you think about someone on the spectrum walking through the world everywhere they go, and I encourage you, there are some interesting online simulations of sensory overstimulation. We won't do one of them here, but if you go to Google and search for simulation of overstimulation, you can come up with a lot of videos. To imagine walking through the world 24/7, 365 with an overwhelming assault on all of your senses. No wonder there would be other things that we notice outwardly from people with autism. How challenging that would be to negotiate the world. Of course, this is not every person with autism's experience. As Autism Speaks has said so wonderfully, you meet one person with autism, you meet one person with autism, and it expresses quite differently. But I will tell you that I've talked to numerous people on the spectrum, and they all talk about this. And Judy Singer talks about it as well. And then below, she speaks against the theory of mind piece. So neurotypicals say that people with autism lack theory of mind. They don't understand how other people's minds work. Judy says that's not exactly true. People with autism, she argues, may not understand how neurotypical minds work, but they understand how autistic minds work. So the theory of mind, they have a very good understanding of how their own minds work and how other people with autism's minds might work. They just don't understand how neurotypical people's minds work. Doesn't mean they lack a complete theory of that understanding. It's just a difference in their perspective. So you can see why I love this slide. And one thing that will come up again and again over this study group is it's how important it is to keep the perspective of nothing about us without us in mind, right? We can talk about people with disabilities, but we need to hear their voices. We need to understand firsthand from them what their experiences are. That is how we teach them better. That is how we make our classrooms, our schools, our institutions, our societies more welcoming places. Not by our thinking we know what we need to do, but by asking and learning and listening from the first person perspective. So that's my speech about that slide. In her thesis, Singer talks about some different critical perspectives on disability and ability that I think are really important to think about. So you can take a capitalist perspective, and you can say that thanks to our fabulous post-industrial society, we are creating all kinds of technologies and prosthetic devices that allow people with disabilities to participate in the economy. I will also say that while people with disabilities do not have the employment rates that people without disabilities have, the employment rate is much lower. There are initiatives going on that are trying to open up the workplace more. There was a recent 60 Minutes segment, maybe 6 months ago, about several companies, including Microsoft, that are really working to open up jobs for people with disabilities, to give them opportunities, and doing things like changing the job interview, how a job interview works, because if you have a certain disabilities, if you are neurodivergent, the interactions that are common in a job interview may not be something that's natural for you, but you may be super qualified for a particular position. So there's some really interesting initiatives going on in workforce development, and there's much more work to do. Then, of course, there's the medicalization perspective, which is this whole drive to classify and medicalize the body. It gives power to the medical professionals, and it objectifies, segregates, and institutionalizes people with disabilities, unfortunately. And it takes away their power, which is huge. And it also looks at disability as something to be cured. We're going to talk about this more when we get into the models of disability later in our presentation. But medicalization perspective is an important perspective to think about, because it is a set of forces at play in our culture when it comes to disability and ability. And then, of course, normalization. This is the idea of the hegemony of normalcy, that being normal, whatever that means, is the position of power. And if you are non-disabled and normal, you are in power. And if you are impaired or disabled, you have less power, right? So that perpetuates these uneven power dynamics. There are other critical perspectives that we could have added here. These are the three that Judy Singer explores in her thesis. There are others, but I think they're important to keep in mind. This is way too much text. I'm going to highlight a few things here. This is a little bit more about her biography. When she was growing up, she was sure that her mom had something seriously wrong with her. And she experienced her mother as maddening, intolerable, like a malign force of will, an endless black hole into which all energy was leached from the family. She had a different body posture, her voice, she was egocentric, she did not sense what others were feeling and could not recognize social cues. She had obsessive routines and high voltage anxiety. She would lash out wildly to her father in anger and frustration. With Judy, she expressed what she called an invasive love, a love that seemed to not know anything about her or realize that she had a mind separate from hers. She experienced her mother as relentlessly cruel to her and her father, and had exclaimed, "Can't you be normal for once in your life?" It never occurred to her and her father that maybe she couldn't. So that phrase, "Can't you be normal for once in your life," goes back to the title of the chapter. And then Judy noticed in her own child that by the age of 2, she was not developing normally, and Judy feared that it was autism because she knew of the genetic connection at that point, and eventually her daughter was diagnosed. And that allowed Judy, as she learned more and more about autism, to re-examine her relationship with her mother through that lens. So understanding autism gave her a framework to think about what her mother was experiencing and to think about why her experience of her mother at the time when she was a child was the way that it was. She self-diagnosed herself, Judy did, with Asperger syndrome. We're not going to talk about the DSM-4 and 5 and all of that, but you know that Asperger syndrome right now is not a separate diagnosis in the US. But Judy sees herself in the middle of 3 generations of women on the autism spectrum. So this work for her is deeply personal. Foundational to her experience of the world as a human being, as a child, as an adult, as a mother, and as a person. So her work helped to give further momentum to what is called the autistic self-advocacy movement. And this is a big part of the neurodiversity push. And as it has evolved, it has paralleled other movements. And the idea is to think about disability and difference in a different way. So it's not a social or moral defect in the eyes of the dominant culture. It is a counter-hegemonic social movement. So it is a social movement against that hegemony that we talked about a few slides ago. Internet communities and online resources, and this allows autistic identity to grow and emerge. And the objectives of the autism self-advocacy movement at the time in 1998 were recognition, civil rights and an end to discrimination, and disability services appropriate to their level of functioning on the spectrum. So folks wanted to be recognized, wanted to fight for and achieve more civil rights and end discrimination, and they wanted to receive services that would allow them to function in society better, that were appropriate for their needs. So that's Judy Singer and the origin of neurodiversity. I next want to look at neurodiversity and its role in education. And I'm staying close to this book. This book is Thomas Armstrong's The Power of Neurodiversity, Unleashing the Advantages of Your Differently Wired Brain. I highly recommend this book. I'm going to read an excerpt to you. This is how the book begins. This is the very first couple of paragraphs, few paragraphs in chapter 1. And I'm going to talk with you about this. Imagine for a moment that our society has been transformed into a culture of flowers. Now, let's say, for the sake of argument, that the psychiatrists are the roses. Visualize a gigantic sunflower coming into the rose psychiatrist's office. The psychiatrist pulls out its diagnostic tools and in a matter of half hour or so comes up with a diagnosis. You suffer from hugism. It is a treatable condition if caught early enough, but alas, there is not too much we can do for you at this point in your development. We do, however, have some strategies that can help you learn how to cope with your disorder. The sunflower receives the suggestions and leaves the doctor's consulting room with its brilliant yellow and brown head hanging low on its stem. Next on the doctor's schedule is a tiny bluette. The rose psychiatrist gives the bluette a few diagnostic tests and a full physical examination. Then it renders its judgment. Sorry, bluette, you have GD, or growing disability. We think it's genetic. However, you needn't worry. With appropriate treatment, you can learn to live a productive and successful life in a plot of well-drained, sandy loam somewhere. The bluette leaves the doctor's office feeling even smaller than when it came in. Finally, a calla lily enters the consulting room, and the psychiatrist needs only 5 minutes to decide what the problem is. You have PDD, or pedal deficit disorder. This can be controlled, though not cured, with a specifically designed formula. In fact, my local herbicide representative has left me with some free samples if you'd like to give it a try. These scenarios sound silly, but they serve as a metaphor for how our culture treats neurological differences in human beings these days. And when I say these days, this book came out in 2010. Instead of celebrating the natural diversity inherent in human brains, too often we medicalize and pathologize those differences by saying, Johnny has autism, Susie has a learning disability, Pete suffers from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Imagine if we did this with cultural differences or racial differences. We'd be regarded as racists. Yet with respect to the human brain, this sort of thinking goes on all the time under the aegis of so-called objective science. The lessons we have learned about biodiversity and cultural and racial diversity need to be applied to the human brain. We need a new field of neurodiversity that regards human brains as the biological entities that they are and appreciates the vast natural differences that exist from one brain to another regarding sociability, learning, attention, mood, and other important mental functions. Instead of pretending that there is hidden away in a vault somewhere a perfectly quote unquote normal brain to which all other brains must be compared, we need to admit that there is no standard brain, just as there is no standard flower or standard cultural or racial group, and that in fact, diversity among brains is just as wonderfully enriching as biodiversity and diversity among cultures and races. So before I continue, I'd like to pause here and see if there are questions that have either come into the chat or that Laura has found in the questions and answers. There's a question about the graduate certificate in music education and autism. So that's great. I can type the answer to that question. Laura, are there any other questions?
I believe that was the only one.
Okay, we'll pause for a moment to make sure that we don't have any other questions coming in. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So I love this flower analogy, right? Because we do over medicalize, and he's really getting at, with kind of a silly example, but I think it really makes the point that this medicalization and this naming things and diagnosing things is not the most helpful. What we need to understand is that there is diversity among all of our brains, and it is wonderfully enriching. There is a natural variability among all of our brains. There is no perfect normal brain. It doesn't exist. So here's one example, but there are a gazillion, right? I'm left-handed. Left-handed brains look different than right-handed brains. They do. I'll give you another example that's even different. So I am a super organized person. You may have figured this out from all the emails and things that we've been engaging with. I'm a super organized person. I have a front table in my house. In normal times, when I go out to work during the day, the night before, I make a list of what I'm going to need that day, and I put everything on the table. So I'm not a person who forgets things at home, because I take the time to make a list. Seems silly, but it works. And then I don't have to go back and pick things up. Good friend of mine doesn't do that. So every time he leaves the house, he's back and forth 5 or 6 times. Forgot the keys, forgot the wallet, forgot the sunglasses, forgot now the mask, whatever it might be, has to go back, has to go back, has to go back. To me, the having to go back is something that I try to avoid by the lists. To this person, the lists seem, awfully regimented, and I don't want to make lists, I just want to go, right? Brains are wired differently. Both perfectly functional human beings, both able to go do what they want to do, different ways of working with the world and working with information. We all know this. Anybody who's lived in any space with any other person has seen how their brain works differently from other people's, right? These differences are to be celebrated. In Temple Grandin's words, different, not less. Another thing that Armstrong argues very strongly in this book is that there are evolutionary advantages to these differences. There's a reason that autism spectrum disorder has continued for generations. We as a human species need people with the wonderful strengths that those differently wired minds bring. We need all of the different strengths. So there are evolutionary advantages to us as a species. Another thing that Armstrong discusses that we'll see in some videos that are coming up is the concept of niche construction. Niche construction means that we need to seek environments that are well suited to how our brains work. So a highly detailed oriented person might seek a career as an accountant. Great career for someone who's good with details. You've got to get every number right. There are very detailed steps. Someone who's likes to seek novelty, maybe a person who has ADHD, who likes lots of new things and is seeking novelty, would not enjoy being an accountant. They would probably want a job where there were lots of new challenges and new experiences every day. So it's about finding the fit for us and for everyone in terms of how our brain works and the world around us and the opportunities we take advantage of. So Armstrong lays out 8 principles of neurodiversity. These are fantastic. So I'll just go through them one by one. The first one is really important. The human brain works more like an ecosystem than a machine. With the advent of computers, cognitive scientists have talked for a while now, decades, about our brains being like computers. But our brains are not really like computers. Our brains are more like an ecosystem. There's neuroplasticity, where we can create new neural pathways. There's different kinds of terrain and environments in our brain that have different functions. So it's more like an ecosystem than it is like a machine. And all human beings and all human brains exist along continuums of competence, right? So some of us are in a certain place on the personal organization continuum. Others are on a different place, or all of us are on a different place in visualization and spatial relationships, right? You can think about multiple intelligence in this way, but you can think about lots of other kinds of cognitive competence that we all have. You can even think about people who are in different places on the social skills level of competence, right? And there's different aspects of that, of course. Number 3, competence is culturally bound, super important. So the values of the culture to which you belong help to define what competence means. So if you are in a culture that is a hunter and gatherer culture, then being able to navigate, being able to move through space quietly, being able to see the creatures that you need to hunt, right? Those are the competencies that are going to be valued in that culture. If you are in a culture where people are accountants, then the detail orientation of accountants and being good at math and being good at rules and numbers and understanding the tax code and how to apply it are going to be the values of that culture that will develop, that will define competency. Similarly, whether you're regarded as disabled or gifted depends largely on when and where you were born. Again, because there is a cultural aspect, and it's temporal as well. It does depend on time. So people who were born in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was a different concept of disability than, as we'll talk about, there is today, right? And how that is regarded by other people is temporally bound and culturally bound. Success in life is based on adapting one's brain to the needs of the surrounding environment. So you're in a certain environment, you need to adapt to those needs so that you can be successful in that area in life. But it also depends on modifying your environment to fit the needs of your unique brain. And that's the niche construction bit, right? So in your environment, what can you do so that your unique brain can function well? It might be selecting a particular environment, or it might be within one that you happen to be in, how you can make that work best. Niche construction includes career and lifestyle choices, assistive technologies, human resources, and other strategies that enhance our lives that are tailored to the specific needs of a neurodiverse individual. So there's lots of different elements to niche construction. Positive niche construction that helps people function better, directly modifies the brain. That's the neuroplasticity, which then enhances the brain's ability to adapt to the environment. So we get this ongoing cycle of the brain getting better and better. You repeat and continue to activate similar neuropathways, and it enhances your ability to adapt to the environment, and your brain is actually changing. As musicians, many of us, and artists, we know this. When you study a new instrument, you are activating different neural pathways. You are using different muscles. You are gaining new muscle memory. You might be reading music differently. You might be learning by ear. You might be using a different clef or a different notation. All of these things are activating new neural pathways and actually changing the shape of your brain and the terrain of your brain through neuroplasticity. So I love these principles. I think they are incredibly helpful. This is a graphic about neurodiversity that I think is a helpful tool. And yes, you're going to get a PDF of the slides. I think it's a helpful tool. It is an incomplete graphic in the sense that it lists 6 different diagnoses in those bubbles. There are many others we could list here, but I love the center. Neurodiversity. Evolution has created specialist thinkers to bring a variety of expertise to humanity. So we are not looking at these differences in terms of what is challenging, what they can't do. We're looking at the positive gifts that and the unique strengths that each of these diagnoses bring. And we do this without negating that there are challenges. No question, there are challenges for people who have any of these or other diagnoses. But there are also, and it gets lost in the shuffle, incredibly important strengths. So here we have listed ASD in the bottom left corner, autism spectrum disorder. Concentration, fine detail processing, and sequencing are three. There are more of some of the unique strengths. On the other side, ADHD, creative ability, novel thinking, 3D mechanical ability, and energy and passion. Those are just some examples. There are others. So, and as I said, there are only 6 bubbles here. We could add other bubbles. But the point, the bigger point is that while having one of these named disabilities or diagnoses definitely means that there are some challenges that you face, it also means that there are unique strengths and gifts, and we need to see both sides of that equation. So a little summary about neurodiversity, and then we're going to go to some videos. Neurodiversity was coined by Judy Singer. High functioning autism is what she thought of for herself. Brain differences are to be expected. There is no average or normal brain, incredible amounts of variation. Brain differences are not deficits. Brain differences often bring strengths to the individual, and brain differences often bring advantages for society. Before I launch into a couple of videos to share with you, this would be a good moment. Laura, do we have any questions that have come in? We have another one.
Yep, one question in the Q&A.
Okay, I'll answer this live. Mrs. Van Ellis wrote, in my opinion, is it beneficial or detrimental to have a child formally diagnosed with autism? This is a tricky question. And it really is a matter of individual family preference. And it also varies not only from family to family within one culture, but across cultures quite a bit. So individuals who are diagnosed with any disability, any neurodivergent disability or diagnosis, may be able to benefit in the United States from legally mandated supports through the individualized education plan process. And so as educators, we want to see that happen because we want the students to be able to get those supports. It's not so simple. There are families who, for many personal reasons, would prefer that their family member not receive the diagnosis. In some cultures, the diagnoses are quite stigmatizing. I have a graduate student who wrote her master's thesis. She graduated last year, wrote her master's thesis on families in China and the enormous stigmatization that happens when a child in the family is diagnosed with autism. She's from China. She went home and interviewed families. It's incredible. And that's not the only culture. There are many cultures where the stigma is so great that the diagnosis would be problematic. There are other situations where perhaps for example, there's a child who has relatively mild ADHD and it doesn't interfere with their functioning and they're able to manage it pretty well and to do well in school and in life. The diagnosis may not matter so much. So parents and families may decide not to get diagnosed if there's nothing interfering with effective and successful functioning from day to day. So I see all the different sides of the issue. I also know people who were diagnosed later in life. I have a former student who was diagnosed with ADHD in his 30s. And it was one of those things that, like, once he got that diagnosis, it explained so much to him. He was like, now I understand why school was hard or why this situation was hard. I thought something was, I thought I was crazy. It was like a validating thing. Oh, there's a category for me and it's called ADHD and I can work with people and there are strategies I can learn, and he's done that. So for him, it was a great experience. I think it's very personal, and I sense and understand and empathize with the frustration that some of us feel as educators when we wish that a family would have a student evaluated so that they could have access to services. but I also want to respect the very deeply personal aspects of this. And I think we should mention this as well. This is also a statement on where a particular society is in relation to neurodiversity, right? So if we were in a place as a society where neurodiversity was celebrated, what Judy Singer is hoping for, we haven't gotten there yet. She was hoping for it in 1998. We're still not there. But if we could be in a place where neurodiversity was deeply understood and celebrated, and the stigma wasn't there, and the power dynamics, the hegemony of normalcy had been evaporated, then getting diagnosed wouldn't have all that stigma, wouldn't have all that negative valence. We're not there yet. So, and I sincerely hope we get there. I'm looking to our future generations of leaders to help us get there, but we're not there yet. And so one aspect of not being there yet is that it is a challenging set of considerations for individuals and families. And making that decision in that situation is fraught. I know parents who have struggled with this. We have parents in our, families that work with us in our arts education programs. We have parents who have not told their son or daughter that they have a diagnosis. They've chosen not to do that. And that's fine. That's their choice. I respect their choice. And they have their own reasoning. I have a former student whose son had a pretty significant hearing loss, and the family had some issues about whether or not they were going to get him tested for a long time. They eventually did, and it was a good thing because the hearing loss was more significant than they thought. It's a very murky area. I would not put myself in a position to legislate what other people should do. So that is my answer to that question. Looks like we've got another question or comment from Emily. In the UK, having a diagnosis provides legally enforced protections and rights. It also supports in gaining additional educational financial support and allowances, additional time and support in exams, etc. However, as an educator in a multicultural society, have seen how difficult even the idea of a diagnosis can be due to cultural stigma. Exactly. It's different in different in cultural environments, but it's not straightforward at all. It's really tricky. Laura, is there anything else coming up for us in the chat or in the questions? No, it does not look like it. We're good. All right, so I have to stop a share and redo a share so we can watch a couple of things. So please bear with me. So some of these videos might start with ads, and I apologize, but we'll get to them as quickly as to the meat of the video as quickly as we can. Laura, do we see this ad for Oatly milk? Thank you.
Neurological differences like autism or ADHD are considered to be dysfunctional disorders and disabilities under the medical model of mental health. There's too little attention given to enabling people with neurologically different minds to be accepted for themselves, to discover and celebrate their strengths, and to find a place in society that values their differences. When most of us think of diversity, we think of things like race or sexual orientation, but there's a different kind of diversity you might not know about, neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is the concept that neurological differences among people should be recognized and respected. I believe it's time for this new social movement, the neurodiversity movement, to take off. Neurodiversity is a part of our genetics and of our evolution as a species. The genes for autism and ADHD are not errors, but rather are the result of variations in the human genome that have and will continue to have advantages for society. One of the genes associated with ADHD The DRD4 gene is known as the novelty-seeking gene. It arrived on the human evolutionary scene over 10,000 years ago. Genes associated with autism also go back more than 10,000 years. Research suggests that genetic variants linked to autism might have been positively selected during human evolution because they contributed to exceptional memory skills, heightened perception in vision, taste, and smell, a precise eye for detail, and an enhanced understanding of systems such as animal behavior. These characteristics likely remain in the gene pool today because they are still advantageous. As a psychologist advising the parents of differently wired kids, I tell parents they have a choice between trying to change the child to fit the environment and changing the environment to fit the child. There are many different microhabitats and subcultures in our world. For an individual with autism or ADHD, finding success on their own terms may come from discovering the particular niche that fits best, the niche that allows their strengths to shine and their challenges to be minimized. Individuals with ADHD tend to thrive in situations of rapid change, variety, and that reward creativity and out-of-the-box thinking. A career as a comedian, detective, entrepreneur, journalist, actor, EMT technician, or photographer could be. I'm not saying that having autism or ADHD is easy. And I don't mean to downplay the real suffering that can be caused by having a neurodevelopmental condition, disability, or difference. But it's also time the world sees the beauty and value in brain differences. Neurodiversity might be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. My vision is for a neurodiversity-tolerant and accepting society where differences are celebrated for the depth and dimension they bring to the human condition. I want children whose brains are wired differently to be encouraged to find their niche instead of changing to fit other people's ideas of normal. Diversity in every sense makes our world a better place, and people who think differently are a huge part of that.
So you can see why I like that video. I think it's a good introduction to neurodiversity and pulls together a lot of the things we talked about. And she talks about niche construction as a piece of that. I have another video that I'd like to share with you. I wonder if I can still do it from here. Laura, let's find out. Do you see an ad for VRBO? I think because I'm still in Chrome, it should work. So we're going to get through this ad.
This is the checkers game where grandson and granddad will bond. This is the
My name is Elisabeth Wiklander, and I am autistic. What do you think about when you hear the word autistic? How do you react when you hear the word autism? Would you say that it is a lifelong disorder, an impairment, a disability? This is indeed the way medical language describes it, but autism is so much more than that. No diagnostic manual can truly explain the multifaceted experience of autism. It is a neurological difference with a vast spectrum of representation within its population. It can come with remarkable gifts and skills, as well as devastating traits. But autism doesn't necessarily equal disability. And thankfully, today we have a word that challenges this negative terminology: neurodiversity. Neurodiversity describes how diverse we are as human beings from a neurological perspective. It suggests that the many variations of human brains, like autistic ones, should be accepted as a natural and valuable part of humanity's genetic legacy. DNA shows us that autism is primarily a genetic condition, something that has been passed down through generations and is still widely shared in the general population. These genes can carry something so positive, in spite of the difference they cause, that they have persisted throughout our evolution and still flourish today. Some of our important inventions, pieces of art and music, and discoveries in scientific fields that have moved our world forwards come from autistic minds. With today's exciting new technologies in neuroscience, we have seen that autistic brains differ from the norm. Not only that, but it appears as if each and every one differs in its own unique way. So, autism is rich in expression, but still faces limiting generalizations. Today, I want to talk about the autism that I display, the one that blends with normality and can have catastrophic impacts on people's lives, not necessarily because of the autism itself, but because of the ignorance of it, or the failure to recognize that it is there in the first place, as I eventually would discover. Now, in social situations, we do have expectations upon one another. We use a certain kind of rule book, which, when followed, rewards us with social acceptance. But I always felt that I was different. The trouble was I couldn't explain how, and certainly not why. It felt as if I had been provided a different rule book, and that I lacked a community to fall back upon that could confirm to me that the way I interpreted the world was valid too. So I grew up feeling very misunderstood by pretty much everybody, even within my own family. If I applied what would have been my motives, my intentions, upon someone else's behavior, or vice versa, the outcome was often negative and very confusing. So to me, the social world became scary and unpredictable. Now, I did notice, however, especially during my school years here in Sweden, that my mind had been blessed with gifts, like analytical skills, an intense mental focus, high capacity for memorizing information, which made studying very pleasurable and easy. So in my academic pursuit, I came here to Gothenburg, where I studied at the university. I later went to the Netherlands, where I attained my Master of Music. And today, I live in the UK, working as a professional cellist in the London Philharmonic Orchestra, touring the world. But this, however, is quite unusual for me, to stand on a stage just talking to you without my instrument. I can't help the feeling that I have forgotten it somewhere. Okay, so one may now think, okay, she plays in this great orchestra. She's obviously done pretty well for herself. What's the problem? Well, I have a very literal mind. And it constantly clashes with both non-verbal and verbal subtleties in social situations. It gives me a very direct line of approach and speech in everyday conversations. I still don't really understand the purpose of small talk, although I can appreciate it now. And jokes and sarcasm fly completely over my head. My mind just takes things in so literally. It loves to analyze everything. My world is a very intense one. My senses are heightened. My brain absorbs everything in through an amplifier. My special interests can completely consume me. And my emotions, they go from the highest of high to the lowest of low, and they're on and off like a light switch. My family, bless them, they can still stand in utter disbelief when I go from a complete nuclear blast to rainbows and butterflies in less than 2 seconds, literally. So, okay, autism influences my thoughts, my imagination, my senses, my emotions, and the way I process information. But without knowing this, it was very difficult to maintain friendships because our social expectations were so different. I could come across as odd, and I experienced a good amount of bullying for it. But the most devastating were the eroding misunderstandings that dominated the relationships with the people closest to me. Body signals, misread. words completely misinterpreted. It was so frustrating. It was like fighting a ghost, something that no one could really grasp, not even the counselors we sought for help. So it was a mentally agonizing situation that persisted year after year. And in my mid-20s, I had reached a really dark place. And I started to be truly scared for my future. But then, something extraordinary happened that changed everything. In 2006, I heard about Asperger syndrome. It is already an outdated term today, but it is still a form of autism on the high-functioning end of the spectrum. 3 years later, when I was 28 years old, I received this diagnosis. And I realized that a good third of my life had been based upon a false perception of myself. Imagine that. No wonder my life had been so confusing. But now I started to see myself in a new, clear context. My whole life and all my experiences just started to make sense. This launched me on an incredible journey of enlightenment and transformation. I had finally been given something that allowed me to explore the relativity of my perception of the world compared to others. I gained access into that mysterious rule book, and I could start comparing it with mine. And so I learned to identify my differences. So in the coming years, I found efficient ways to improve my social skills. I learned to verbalize my needs, recognize my limitations, and develop my strengths. I founded successful strategies to navigate my everyday life and significantly improved all the disabling traits of my diagnosis. But this took a lot of commitment, dedication, and hard work. Because autism is a spectrum, I had to become like a researcher and collect a lot of information from a lot of different sources over a long period of time in order to be able to complete my unique life puzzle. When I thought that I had reached the level of conformity that society demanded, I kept feeling that something was not quite right. Something was still missing. I could change the way I acted, but I cannot change the way I am. My natural biological calibration is and always will be autistic. And the problem I had now was to live up to these new high social standards that I had set for myself. I had come to understand my differences. But as you all know, a relationship is a two-way street. Without acceptance and understanding for the real me, I would never be truly happy. And this prompted me to one day make quite a radical move. On the 2nd of April, 2015, I announced my autism on social media. And I started to talk about it with everybody, openly, bang, just like that. I admit it was absolutely terrifying, because I had encountered what was out there, the stigma, the prejudice. I was very afraid that people would put their preconceived ideas of autism onto me rather than letting me show them what autism can look like. But this didn't happen. What happened was that my life changed completely, almost overnight. I was met with curiosity, and support started to flood in from everywhere, from friends, from family, from colleagues, and from people I didn't even know. Media started to take notice, and people who recognized themselves in my story started to contact me from near and far for help. Seeing how common the situation was, and how efficiently it could be reversed using the same tools that I had, it inspired me to share my experience further. that the knowledge of neurodiversity opens new communication channels between us by identifying differences we didn't know of before because they have been hidden in our minds. It unlocked my world with the key to identify my differences and to communicate these in a way that we could all understand. So today, I'm a very happy person. I've got wonderful friendships. I've connected deeper with my family members, and I'm experiencing what it is to be in a happy, healthy relationship with a wonderful man, who's thankfully also very patient, because misunderstandings, they still do happen. But now they can be resolved, so they're no longer a threat to our relationship. We have taught one another to read each other's rule books, and it is enriching both of our lives. I'm still autistic, but I love it. I embrace it. I can no longer align myself with the word disabled, because in retrospect, I understand that the suffering that I have experienced does not stem from my autism itself, but from the impacts of ignorance about it. So if we need a cure for anything, it's not for autism, it's for ignorance and intolerance. Differences are always challenging. But they are equally what makes this world such a beautiful and spectacular place. By recognizing how we differ from each other from a neurological perspective, helps us to coexist more smoothly without having to carve so much in our authenticity, allowing our natural skills, talents, and creativity more freedom to roam, not just for people on the autism spectrum, but for all. By joining forces, we can create a larger picture of ourselves and inspire each other on new levels. The autistic population is not an insignificant one. In the UK only, we are nearly 1 million people. So knowingly or not, you will find us amongst your friends and colleagues. We might be a family member, your boss, or a neighbor. You might have fallen in love with someone on the autism spectrum. Why? Why must we wear a one-size-fits-all? Because it fits the majority of people. Should what is neurologically accepted be determined by what's the majority? Is human value determined by what is the majority? No, of course not. But yet, a lot of autistic individuals, too many, can still not access their basic rights as citizens because ignorance of our difference still permeates every aspect of society. We deserve the same access to education, with knowledge and flexibility regarding our unique information processing. We deserve the same access to the workforce, with understanding for our sensitivity to social deciphering and sensory input. We deserve appreciation and recognition for our skills, and we deserve the same access to adequate help and support, where the true source of our struggle is better recognized. All services have to start evolving towards taking neurodiversity into account, or a lot of people will continue to fall through the net, and that is ultimately harmful to our entire society. It is unacceptable that because some don't fit a standard norm, they risk being bullied, discriminated, labeled as impaired, and pushed to the edge of society, becoming spectators behind a glass wall. It is a weakness that deprives us of contributions from unique minds that are valuable to us all. Because they're different, because they think outside the box. The quirky kid from school, like me, has just as much to offer the world as anybody else. Every human being is a resource, And society has to broaden its framework to allow everyone a place in it. This may seem a daunting task, but we mustn't be discouraged. Extraordinary things can and have been done by ordinary people, no matter through which spectrum we perceive the world. Thank you.
I hope you can see why I like that video so much. I want to stop the share and come back and see if we've got any questions or comments. We have a couple of open questions that I can't for some reason see. Oh, because I answered them live. Okay. Any other questions or comments that have come up at this time? So I'll say a few words and then we're going to go to another video. The important thing here, and that I think we see so prominently in the second video, is in the words of a person who is neurodivergent, right? So hearing her experience and how that shapes what she has to say, I think is extraordinary. And I think she's extremely articulate. I have, yes, absolutely. I have another one for you that I want to get to. Bear with me just a second. One of the worst things about Zoom is that control thing at the top. Okay, so this is in the words of a person with ADHD. And it starts with an ad. I apologize.
We've made shopping easy. Use our Wegmans app or visit us at wegmans.com to shop.
Cool. Okay. Hi. My name is Steven Zanzi, and I'm a director and a writer, an actor, a drummer, scuba diver, soccer player, a camera operator, an airbrush artist, a physicist, a stargazer, a rock climber, a snowboarder, a model maker, a stage manager, a camp counselor, a PA, a DJ, a club president, a magician, and for a brief stint in May of 2012, I was called upon to repair 2 stopwatches which had stopped working. Who am I, you ask? My name is Stephen Tonti, and I have ADHD. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, and I was first diagnosed with ADHD not by a diagnostician or a private practice or a pediatrician, but by a 2nd grade teacher who was interviewing me for a spot at the school she was working at. Now, you see, my family had just moved from New Orleans, Louisiana to Dallas, Texas, and I was in a search for a new academic home. Now, during this particular interview, this particular teacher received a message ahead of time from my 1st grade teacher back in New Orleans to check me for any signs of ADHD. And just as she reached the series of questions devised to evaluate whether a child between the ages of 5 and 17 is ADHD, wham! I fell out of my chair. No, I didn't slip. And no, the chair didn't crumble beneath me. You see, behind the teacher's desk was this giant window. And through that window was a giant field. And on that field were what appeared to me at the time to be hundreds of thousands of kids my age. And they were all playing with a great, big, inflatable rainbow beach ball. And as they played and moved all around the field, it was all I could do to keep track of them. So I leaned a little bit to the left, and I leaned a little bit to the right, and I leaned a little bit more to the left, and a little bit more to the right before disaster. I still maintain today that window was a trap and I was set up. So I was rejected from middle school because I was an 8-year-old boy who couldn't sit still in his chair. Oh, and there was this complex marshmallow-related incident between myself and some of the staff there. But anyway, I ended up at the Episcopal School of Dallas. And over the next 11 years, I tried everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Extracurriculars. I tried computing, robotics, carpentry, canoeing, rock climbing, poetry club, logic club, poker club, comedy club, and camping. I went camping at least twice a year for 4 years, and band. Oh my God. I tried the trumpet, the saxophone, the piano, the electric bass, the stand-up bass, the guitar, both acoustic, and did I mention I played sports? It was Texas. We played sports. I tried all of them. And the drums. And I even took a short-lived stab at the harp. I played 7 different instruments. Play being a very generous term. When all of a sudden my school built a theater, and I thought, why not? So I started in the shop building sets, and then I moved to the sound booth, and then the light booth, and then my teacher asked me to act, so I played Conrad in Ordinary People. And then I said, can I direct? And she said, go for it. So I directed 12 Angry Jurors, because this is high school, people, and you can't direct 12 Angry Men with a drama school that has 3 boys and 4 girls. Yes, for the people doing the math at home, that's 7 drama students for a show with a 12 in it. And before I knew it, I was auditioning and interviewing at drama schools across the country. And that's when Carnegie Mellon found me. And I love it here. I really do. But moving on. So what? So I have ADHD. And ADHD is misunderstood as an inability to focus. But it's much stranger than that. It's not a lack of focus, period. It's that I have a hard time selecting something and giving it my full attention. Something has to grab my attention, pique my curiosity, and then I can hyper-focus. Now, this is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because I have a hard time completing things that don't excite me. And we live in a world where you have to read your textbooks and pay your taxes. And yes, big textbooks with no pictures frighten me. And no one likes handling taxes. Well, actually, some of you might like that. But the upside is, when something does pique my curiosity, I become obsessed and I hyper-focus. I spend a lot of time with film. I can spend upwards of 12 hours in a row editing clips, sometimes until 6:30 in the morning. In the theater, when I have to put a show up, I'll pull 15-hour days for weeks on end, and I enjoy that. I love that. I can read a 500-page novel that I love much faster than a 1-page article I don't care for. It's easier for me to see the big picture. As a director, I have to track 20 people with very different jobs, from designers to writers to actors, and I find handling that much easier than finishing that 1-page article, which I'm still working on. David Neilman, the founder and CEO of JetBlue, who is also ADHD, mind you, says, I have a hard time doing the mundane things in life. I have an easier time planning a 20-aircraft fleet than I do paying my light bill. Yeah. So, another good thing about ADHD is, because I felt compelled to try everything, I was able to explore all the possible career paths I might not have, and might not have discovered what I truly want to do. So many teens and young adults are expected to focus on 1 or 2 fields of study, and 1 or 2 hobbies, and hope and pray they like the ones they've chosen, or that have been chosen for them. My job is to tell other people's stories, and I find an easier time doing that when I can draw from all of these other perspectives. It's easier for me to see the world through the eyes of a drummer because I've tried that. It's easier for me to see the world through the eyes of a graphic designer because I've tried that too. ADHD is a difference in cognition, not simply a disorder. We are attention different, not attention deficit. But because it is treated and misunderstood as a disorder, it's treated as something that needs fixing. So the idea seems to be that we need to get rid of my ADHD. But there's no getting rid of it, there's just sedating it. I was lucky. My high school teachers were hip, young progressives who were delighted to give me extra time, the additional attention, and the overall freedom to express myself the way that I felt necessary. So many other kids with ADHD aren't as lucky. For example, my roommate. Adam has been my roommate for 4 years. He is an excellent actor in the School of Drama and a brilliant thinker. We both grew up in Dallas, Texas, and we both have ADHD. Adam's high school was different. Now, even though he grew up only 15 minutes north of me, Adam's high school had harsher penalties for falling out of your chair. Now, you see, when you're a kid diagnosed with ADHD, your doctor administers a series of amphetamines, and everybody waits, because no one has a clue how you'll react. You might get more calm. You might become depressed. You might lash out at the people around you. Now, the difference between Adam and me is when new medication may cause me to act out, my teachers immediately advise my doctors that I change my medication. However, when Adam tried a new medication, his teachers wrote this in his report. Adam is less motivated, less animated, and less involved in class activities, but at least he's quiet now. We need a healthier understanding of people with ADHD, and it starts at home. I had a mother and a father who supported every obsession. I distinctly recall my father asking one day, "Son, you're only 14. What could you possibly want with an air compressor?" To which I responded, "I want to airbrush t-shirts and shorts and sell them to my classmates and friends." All right then. And he would go out and he would get it, and I would play with it, and I would obsess over it. During the summers when I went off my medication and my body was wrecked with the effects of withdrawal, my mother sat by my side, literally coaxing the migraines out of me. With their support, I was able to explore, and my obsessions grew and multiplied, and I was able to maintain my sanity. Schools need to develop a better attitude towards students with ADHD as well, and there are plenty of examples out there. For instance, the Eagle Hill School in Hardwick, Massachusetts. The Eagle Hill School believes that every student can learn, that learning differently requires teaching differently, and that we must educate our kids, our students, to learn about learning in order to form new beliefs in a search for intellectual autonomy. Professors who act more as mentors as opposed to disciplinarians inspire me. When teachers level with me, I feel like I'm more in control, that there's a dialogue regarding new ways of thinking and approaching a problem, focusing, completing tasks. We have to create and develop a healthier relationship with medication. I think that Ritalin, Adderall, Concerta should only be prescribed to someone who can physically handle the effects of these drugs and their withdrawal. 12 is far too young. 16 is still too young. There are so many alternatives to medication. Studies have shown that for some, it's just an added weight or pressure to help them focus. And these things exist. There are weighted pads that help people feel more comfortable so they can complete tasks on time. For some people, it's tics like chewing pencils. So give them rubber-coated pencils. We have to teach kids to teach themselves. It's the best thing that we can do for our kids. And lastly, our society has to embrace cognitive diversity. For example, Special Eastern, or The Specialists, is a Danish organization that trains people with autism and ADHD as consultants in IT and other more technically oriented tasks and jobs. We have to turn this joke around on those who believe that my disorder divides me from my more normal peers. Besides, who here at Carnegie Mellon really qualifies as normal anyway? Yeah. A great author, a masterful playwright, and a sublime poet once writ. Any guesses as to who I speak of? Shakespeare. Thou art correct. Shakespeare's Sonnet 121. 'Tis better to be vile than vile esteemed, when not to be receives reproach of being, and the just pleasure lost, which is so deemed not by our feelings, but by others' seeing. For why should others' false adulterate eyes give salutation to my sportive blood? Or, on my frailties, why are frailer spies, which in their wills count bad what I think good? Nay, I am that I am. They that level at my abuses reckon up their own. I may be straight, though they themselves be bevel. By their rank thoughts, my deeds must not be shown, unless this general evil they all maintain. All men are bad, and in their badness reign. In Sonnet 121, Shakespeare condemns hypocrisy. He implores us not to let others' false adulterate eyes condemn us for something they believe us to be. He begs you not to let the selfish and negative comments of others hinder the just pleasures owed to you. A hierarchy of frailer spies have asked me to conform to society's means. And I propose the opposite. I propose let society conform to me. And I implore you to do the same. I'll leave you with something that Robin Williams, a poster child for us in the ADHD community, once said. We are all only given a little spark of madness. You mustn't lose it. Thank you.
Okay. I think you can see why that particular video is one that I love so much. Hearing in two individuals' own words, their experience, and both of them in their own way, calling for neurodiversity, calling for changes in society and education. I love Stephen Tonti's line, we are attention different, not attention deficit. I just think that is perfect, right? One of the issues I have is with that name, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Two negative words in one diagnostic label. Pretty awful valence when you think about it. Laura, how are we doing in terms of chat and questions? I see no new Q&As. Does anyone have any questions or comments they would like to share either in the Q&A or in the chat or by raising your hand? I'll give it a second before we move on. Looks like we're good. I'm going to move on. I want to show you a really interesting web page. So I'm going to share back to Chrome. And here it is. So this is from a blog called Neurocosmopolitanism. And we're not going to go through this entire page, but I want you to see this particular blogger, Dr. Nick Walker, puts forward some basic terms and definitions around neurodiversity. So for example, that neurodiversity is the diversity of human minds, the infinite variation in neurocognitive functioning within our species. It's a biological fact, not a perspective, not an approach. It's a biological fact. It's not a movement. There is a movement called the neurodiversity movement, but neurodiversity in itself is not the movement. And so he goes through a number of terms this way: neurodiversity paradigm, movement, etc. As you will see on the slides here, you'll get the video with the link right up here so that you can check out this website on your own. I can't really copy it to the chat, but you won't need to because it'll be in the slides. I strongly recommend reviewing this because it does a wonderful job. I do this with my students of helping us think about language. Language is super important. It is contextual. It varies from culture to culture, but language around disability, diversity, neurodiversity is important to understand and to grapple with. So I love that resource as something that we can use. So going back to PowerPoint, you won't be able to see that. Hang on. That's not what I want to do. Okay. I need to go back to Zoom and back to sharing. And as we do, I see that there's something in the chat. So hang on, let me share this and get us back to where we were here. Can't get the slideshow to go until it, there we go. And then there was something in the chat. Laura, are you able to read the chat for me?
Yes, there is a question about getting the names of the two TED Talk speakers.
All of that's going to be in the video. But Stephen Tonti is the ADHD speaker. I don't have the name of the first speaker, but as I said, it's all going to be in the video. You'll see the link right there. That's the easiest way to get it. Thank you for that, Laura. Anything else in the chat? Just checking. Thank you, Dave Drew. Elizabeth Vielander, thank you. Thank you. See, we don't need me. Great. So this was where we left off with our summary of neurodiversity. We are going to next move into the medical model and social model of disability. So, and the affirmative model of disability. So this is important in terms of thinking about how disability is conceptualized and the broader cultural, social, intellectual contexts for disability that we all live in. So a traditional model of disability that had been around for quite some time was the medical model. And this relates to what we talked about earlier with the medicalization piece that Judy Singer was referring to. But the medical model of disability, which was the prevailing understanding of disability, like I said, for quite some time. If you look at the left of this slide, located the problem of disability in the individual. So you see the person there is the problem. And over on the right, we see impairments and chronic illness often pose real difficulties, but they are not the main problems. The traditional view, the medical model of disability, is that disability is caused by a physical, sensory, or mental impairment, that the individual is impaired, and that the individual is the problem. And the focus of the medical profession is to quote unquote cure or alleviate the effect of the impairment. If we go back to Stephen Tonti and this idea that ADHD should be cured, that they should get rid of his ADHD. But as he says, there's no getting rid of it, there's only sedating it. And the medical profession tries all kinds of medications in order to alleviate the effect of the impairment. This is a medical model. When we heard about our Rose psychiatrist and those diagnoses in that fictitious world that Thomas Armstrong put forth for us, that's a medicalization model. This was the prevailing understanding of disability for a really long time. There are some important things to note here. Disability is considered a problem. It is a negative thing. And the idea is that we want to eliminate that problem and that the medical profession is the place to do that, that doctors and psychiatrists have the power, have the means to eliminate the problem, and that we want a society with no problems. That's all underscoring this model. It gives the medical profession a whole lot of power. It also extends that hegemony to hegemony of normalcy, because it gives this idea of if you don't have a problem, that is the desired place to be. That is the more powerful place to be. So that is the medical model of disability, which, as I said, prevailed for quite some time and is a traditional view. It was eclipsed by the social model of disability back 30 or so years ago. This model of disability, if we look on the left of the graphic, places the disability in the barriers between the individual and society. So we have an individual who is trying to access society, and there are barriers between them, right? So these social barriers might be an inaccessible environment due to buildings and how they're constructed, services and how they're offered, communication and how it takes place, language and how language is used. There may be attitudinal barriers, prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination that take place in society. And organizations in society might be inflexible in their practices or in their procedures. So here what we have is a person with an impairment, but the real disability doesn't come until they encounter a barrier with society. There's a video that describes this really, really well, and I want to take us there. So. Oops, exactly what I don't want. Okay. This is a video about the social model of disability.
I always felt being a disabled person was a problem. After learning about social model, it challenged me to look at disability completely differently. I myself was able to gain some confidence and self-esteem.
Social model basically says we are people with impairments, and those impairments clearly have an impact on how we live our lives. But the impairments are not the things which disable us.
I'm disabled by the world around me, and if the world was more accessible, I would be less disabled, and then I would just be left with my impairment, i.e. what doesn't work. It's not that my legs don't work that's disabling me, it's the fact that if I want to, if I'm on a flat surface, I can wheel around fine, I'm wonderfully happy. It's only when I come up to a flight of stairs.
As a wheelchair user, you have a slightly easier job of explaining the social model. Whereas if you're trying to explain the less physical barriers, it's much harder.
There's barriers everywhere in life to do with how we communicate, to do with people's attitudes.
Discovering the social model actually was a massive liberation on another level. Yeah, I was being treated differently, and no, it wasn't me being deficient, it was everybody else's social anxieties that were being projected onto me.
The blame for you not fitting in is no longer on your shoulders.
Suddenly, my disability is out there and not in here. It was what made me realise that I was something beyond the thing that other people thought I was.
It's a real liberating thing, but it also means you can change it. We can say to the world, look, you must put a lift in this building. You must make sure that the signage is readable for people with visual impairments.
If you want that equality to be real, you've really got to then tackle the inequality people are experiencing in schools, in workplaces, with transport.
The main reason that the social model I think is important to disabled people is that it allows us to be a community. You achieve a whole lot more as a group.
As long as we as disabled people make sure that our voices are heard and that all those people that support us also have their voices heard, I think we will get there.
I hope that Scope is doing work that will help disabled people to become prouder of who we are, pushing boundaries around who can be included and where.
Come the glorious day, if it ever came, where all the barriers went, we'd just be people with impairments. We wouldn't be disabled people anymore.
Find out more about Scope's work and how to get involved by clicking below to subscribe.
So I think that's a really interesting video. For a number of reasons. And one is this distinction between the impairment and the disability, right? So the impairment is something that is encountering something that doesn't work is what they're, I don't love that negative phrase, but something that's encountering challenges, right? So the gentleman who said, my legs don't work, right? That's the impairment. The disability, according to the social model, is the barriers that are placed. They may be physical, like the stairway. They may be attitudinal, right? As we saw in the graphic. But the difference between where is the disability and what is the impairment is a really important connection and distinction that the social model makes. Back to the screen share. Back to PowerPoint. So if we summarize those two before we move past the social model, the medical model focuses on assessment, diagnosis, and treatment. The quote unquote problem is in the individual and their medical problems. It emphasizes the negative, what the person cannot do. Disabled people can never be equal under the medical model because of the power dynamics that it perpetuates. Curing or normalizing the individual or having them make a personal adjustment is so important. Controlled by medical professionals. And this last one is really important. The medical model perpetuates that disability and impairment are tragedies. It's a horrible thing that befalls a person that we should look at in that negative light. When we look at the social model, that focuses on the barriers within a society, locates the problem of the disability in those barriers. And what needs to change then is society, increasing integration, acceptance, breaking down those barriers. As the gentleman, the comedian said, if those barriers would just be gone, right? The social model aims to provide individuals with more power over their own lives and allows for striving for equity in society and education and other realms by breaking down those barriers. However, disability and impairment are still a problem. They're located slightly differently, but there's still a problem. And it still is a tragedy perspective on disability impairment that has an underlying assumption that people with disabilities do not have access to a good quality of life. So there is a negative tragedy perspective. So in the year 2000, two researchers, John Swain and Sally French, put forward the affirmation model of disability. And that tries to look at changing the perspective away from the tragedy perspective. So that was where the video was going to go. We did it there. So the affirmative model of disability says that the impairment is not the problem. Rather, the fact that we learn stereotypes about disability and impairment, that's where the problem is. Disability is not the problem. Disabled people should be taking control over their own bodies and their own lives. It's a direct challenge to the notion that disabled people want to be cured or should be cured. And it puts forth a positive identity of being disabled. The disability arts movement has often expressed this affirmative model. We heard this in the TED Talk by the orchestral musician. We heard undercurrents of this affirmative model for sure. So this originated in 2000 and is a model that we are working towards, that the disability arts movement and the disability justice movement are working towards, because we want to eliminate this notion and really challenge this idea that a disability is a tragedy, is a problem, must be changed or cured. Because a lot of disabled people will say, look, I'm very happy with my body. It does what I want it to do. I have a good life. I'm productive in society. I feel good. I have good friends. I have good relationships. I've found work that makes me feel good, or I do activities that make me feel good. I don't see it as a problem. So we're trying to take away that valence. And I think this is really important in education, where we have a lot of streams of thinking around disability being a problem for different reasons. So that is the affirmative model. This is a wonderful summary that I think I will read out loud to you from an article by Rickson in 2014. The affirmative model of disability does not deny that there may be a negative side to impairment. Rather, it recognizes that impairment is not always undesirable and associated with pain or illness, but can be valuable, exciting, and intrinsically satisfying. Swain and French, and they are the ones who put forth the affirmative model, as I told you, contend that the affirmative model encourages a non-tragic view of disability and impairment, which encompasses positive individual and collective social identities for disabled people. That's super important, right? We don't have enough examples of positive individual and collective social identities for people with disabilities in American society. And this is really a way to counter that problem. In this model, the experience of impairment over time and in various circumstances is taken into account alongside the experience of living within a disabling society. The affirmative model is not about disabled people celebrating unequal oppressive social relationships. People who adhere to the affirmative model are frequently protesting and demonstrating, particularly through the disability arts movement, against marginalization and exclusion. Rather, the affirmative model is about validating the lives and experiences of people with impairments and enabling them to make sense of themselves as actors in their own cultural worlds. That's huge, right? So it's providing a space, a really important space for individual and collective agency. In the other models, the non-disabled are speaking for the disabled, are assuming that people with disabilities want a cure and have a tragedy in their lives, right? And that is not appropriate. This is really about opening up for individual and collective agency. So I have an affirmative model video that I don't like very much. And in the interest of time, I don't think we're going to show it. Instead, I'd like to take a moment and stop the share and see if there are questions or comments about these models of disability. I see some things in the chat. Okay, the disability is society's ignorance and intolerance to embrace and celebrate. Yes, society is missing out on so much. I agree, Navita. S. Chamberlain is asking, is there a preferred term? The terms actually all mean different things. So the terms that were listed here are disabled, impairment, and challenged. Okay, I'm going to go out of order. Challenged is not a good word. So we don't want to say someone is socially challenged or visually challenged. That places a negative valence, the term itself. So that term is not preferred. You can talk about challenges that a person might experience in a bigger conversation, but using it as a term to label a person, challenged is not a word we want to use. Impairment and disability are two different things. So impairment is the thing that gets diagnosed, right? So ADHD or an injury to your legs or an injury to your arms or whatever it might be. The impairment is the physicalization of or the diagnosed piece of the puzzle. Disability is much more about the broader experience that a person goes through. And most people with disabilities want to use the word disabled, but they want people to understand that that word disabled is not a negatively valenced word, is not a word that then means that there should be a cure, that there is a problem, right? We have to, the interpretation of that word is the problem. But that word disability, the disability advocacy community and people with disabilities often, not everybody, of course, but often want to use that word and want to see the power and the positivity in that word. It astounds me that we still emphasize a standardized testing of proven neurodiversity. Can we see the slide? Ginger, I'm not sure which slide you mean, but I'll go back to my share. Do you mean the affirmative model slide? This one, perhaps? Or maybe this one? That might be where it is. Let's see if Ginger is back telling me what she's looking for. Yes, okay, great. So that's the affirmative model slide. This is really important in terms of ourselves as educators and people in this world who interact with a wide range of humans. And I feel like we as a society are slowly making progress in the US, it's different everywhere, are slowly making progress in the US, but there's a long way to go. And disability advocates in the arts are doing great things. So the arts have become, no surprise, right? They're an incredible medium for expression. But people with disabilities who are artists have used those media as ways to express their affirmation of their disability. I am proud, I am strong, I am creative, listen to what I have to say. And that is pretty incredible stuff. And so that is our opportunity as music and arts educators, is that we can help provide people with, everybody in our classes, with that kind of power. There is also the disability justice movement. And if you don't know this book, which I will put in the chat when I have access to the chat, which is now, okay. I will put in the chat Skin, Tooth, and Bone by Sins. I strongly recommend this book, Skin, Tooth, and Bone, which is a primer in disability justice. So I'm using this in my classes right now in the graduate programs. And it goes through principles of disability justice, how the movement has started and where it's going. And it's still a movement in progress. And it is a movement for really inverting that power dynamic, right? Exploding that power dynamic so that individuals with disabilities can achieve that, the civil rights that they have been denied, a more just society, and the participation that they need in society, and the values of society can change to understand, welcome, and reach out in very powerful collaborative ways that equalize power dynamics with people with disabilities. So it's really against a lot of the negativity that we've seen before. And it's a natural continuation of what Judy Singer was writing about in 1998. But this book, this edition, this is the second edition, was published in 2019. So this is cutting edge today, but it is a very natural extension of the movement that Judy Singer was talking about back in 1998. Great. So we're going to take a moment now before we talk about language and also do our logistics and wrap up for the day. I'm going to take 5 minutes. I'm going to stop the share because we don't need slides for this. At the beginning of the session, you all took a few moments and wrote about neurodiversity, what you knew about neurodiversity. We have now experienced a couple of hours, more than that, of detailed work and discussion and videos and all that around neurodiversity, as well as the models of disability. Please we'll give you a few minutes, jot down what you've learned. What have you learned today? So we're going to give you a few minutes of time, and we will come back at that moment. So take a moment and write, please. Thank you. We'll go for about 2 more minutes, and then we will be right back. Okay, so you've written a little bit about something that you've learned. Can folks who would like to share something that you've learned in the chat? I'd love to see your contributions. Ha, Mrs. Van Ellis, that's a fantastic question. There is not really such a forum. She's asking if there's a forum whose goal it is to adjust the laws so that they truly help those who live with physical limitations. There are advocacy groups that work on different levels for the laws, but the federal levels, there isn't really a forum. There are advocacy groups that advocate to their representatives, is the best answer I can give you for that. And those advocacy groups are usually disability self-advocates, which is great. So that's a place where their perspectives are highly represented. And different communities have smaller scale forums. So like in Boston, there's a Commission on Disability, and our state commissioner holds forums where people advocate, and then she brings that to the city. That's the closest we really can get. Ask the students themselves. So we have to be careful when we talk to students, because we can't ask them to tell us a diagnosis. There are laws against conversations like that. So instead of saying, how would you describe your neurodiversity and or learning differences, Suzanne, I strongly suggest that you leave those terms out of it and say, tell me how you learn best. How can I best help you to succeed with your learning? Because speaking about asking students to share diagnostic information is against privacy legislation. So we can't do that. So I would say, ask your students, how do you learn best? How can I best support your learning? That students can certainly tell you without having to talk about a disability in those terms. I really agree, Dave. Attention different, not attention deficit. I'm right with you. Yes, Krista, I think important points, back to Judy Singer, but also thinking about environments. And thanks, Suzanne, for understanding. Tricky stuff. I can't wait to expand my own curriculum further. How can I help you learn best? Glad to hear it. I mean, that's what we're about, right? We want to help our students learn. And most of our students can tell us how they learn best. In my college classes, I hand out index cards. And in the remote environment, they did little mini messages to me. So they're private. And I ask the students to introduce themselves on there, a little bit about themselves, and how do you learn best? How can I best support your learning? Because sometimes I hear from our, at the college, it's different than in K-12 education. Our students have to self-identify and go to an office and fill out paperwork and that sort of thing. So some students don't, but they may tell me how they learn best in terms that can help them. And really, the name of a diagnosis or a disability is not what's important. Everybody learns differently. And it's our job as educators to find those ways, to have as many possible ways to help our students learn, and to find those ways that help our particular students learn best, which is what we're going to be experiencing together in this study group, in fact. It is helpful to have this understanding to include all children in our music programs. Emphasizing strengths is much more important than finding weaknesses. I think the impulse in education to find weaknesses and work to help them comes from a positive place. We want to help our students grow. So we want to figure out what's not working. But the message that comes from that, right, is that there's a problem with you, and I'm going to find that problem and I'm going to fix that problem. And that's the issue that we have to face. So looking from a strengths-based perspective can be much more constructive. I agree. Students definitely enjoy having input, focusing on ability, not disability. We need more neurodiversity among educators. Oh, yes, Emily. Couldn't agree more. We need role models here. We need educators who are neurodiverse. And I'm sure that there are such people. They may not be upfront about it, but we need models, absolutely, Different, not less. That is Temple Grandin's phrase. I recommend reading anything you can by Temple Grandin, and I recommend the HBO bio documentary that Claire Danes stars in, which is pretty wonderful. I want to hang it in your room when you get back, absolutely. People with neurodiversities, don't we all have neurodiversities? You bet we do. Niche construction and how educators can help with modifications. Great, great. I'm pleased to hear about all this learning. Positive psychology movement. Sure, Martin Seligman, you bet. Instead of fixing what's wrong with people, focus on strengths. You bet. Fascinating, Chris. Something you may want to investigate. Absolutely. Remember, all of us, Oscar, we all think and learn differently, right? I write a list the night before and put all my materials on the table. My friend goes back and forth 3 times to find the things he forgot. Differently wired brains, right? I'm an auditory learner. I learn really well and I remember things that I hear. Other people, if we want to think about modalities, right? We have other kinds of learning. All of our brains are wired differently. Right, so there's an interesting overlap between multiple intelligences and thinking about the neurodiversity of our learners. Sure, there's an interesting overlap there. And the research that supports both comes from similar streams in cognitive psychology. Yeah, we're all on many spectra. David Rose, the founder of CAST, which is the Universal Design for Learning organization, and we're going to have Universal Design for Learning, as you know, in this study group in a couple of weeks. He speaks a lot about how we all are on many spectra at the same time. And yeah, you can see that multiple intelligences connection. Fabulous. I love these comments. I'm going to go back to present on the last little bit of content and then do some logistics with us so that we're all in a great place, although we have 4 Q&As. What do teachers need? Oscar. Oscar's asking, what do teachers need to know when educating students with ADHD? I'm deliberately not going to go there because the whole of the study group is going to give you a wide range of strategies. And it's not going to be a checklist. It's not going to be this diagnosis, these strategies. It's not that simple. But you're going to get a wide range of strategies. So the answer I'm going to give you, which is probably not the answer you wanted to hear at this moment, but it's stay tuned because it's coming. We're going to be doing a lot of work with specific teaching strategies in the upcoming meetings. Long overdue philosophical shift. I agree, Lynn. Answer live. Yes, Valerie, I think it is fascinating that the genes for all these different ways of our brains working, whether it be ADHD, autism, Tourette's, dyslexia, you name it, they have remained in our gene pool because there are benefits to humanity. Well put. So we're going to say that's all set. Wonderful to hear, Valerie, about the range of your experiences and your awareness. That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing this. It's great. So I'm going to go back to content. We're nearing the end of the PowerPoint on our content for today. So we're going to talk about language. This may not be new for some of you, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So there is person-first language and there is identity-first language. And as I've said already, language really matters here. When we're working with individuals with disabilities, language matters. So person-first language tends to be person with autism, person who uses a wheelchair. The word person comes first. And the underlying philosophy there is that a person has many elements to their identity. The disability does not define them. I am a person wearing a black sweater. The black sweater doesn't define me. It's one part of my identity. I have curly hair. I'm wearing sneakers today. You can't see them, but I am. I have a silver bracelet on my left hand, right? All these things, plus many more, right? So that's the underlying philosophy. However, It is not how every person with a disability, to use that language, wants to be referred to. Many individuals with disabilities, particularly self-advocates, prefer identity first language, autistic person, disabled person, wheelchair user, deaf person. And that is because these folks believe that the disability is such a fundamental, foundational part of who they are. They want it to be foregrounded. They don't want to be ashamed of it. They don't want to hide it. They are loud and proud and wanting to make that statement. So self-advocates tend to focus on identity first language, and organizations that make policies tend to use person first language. You probably hear person first language more in your schools. Typically, the way to roll is to start with person first language when in doubt, but if you can, and you're working with a particular human or group of humans, ask them for their preference, right? It's like pronouns. It's like lots of language issues that we have today. People need to have agency over the words that are used to describe them. And it's absolutely imperative to do that. Now, if you're talking about an institution-wide thing, policies for hundreds of people, we can't ask each one of those hundreds of people. But if you're in a situation where you can ask, do you prefer person first language or identity first language? Or you notice the language that the person uses, right? So if you're talking with someone with a disability and they say, well, you know, as a blind person, this has been my, well, then you know that they are using identity first language. So you want to use the language that they prefer. This is important just in terms of the ways that language has embedded in it a set of values, right? And so we need to be sensitive to that and understand that when we use a particular linguistic construction, we are communicating a particular set of values that may or may not be what a particular individual prefers. And when we can, we certainly want to go there. Instead of the videos about language, which I don't think are useful to us, we wrote down our thoughts and what we learned. So are there any, before we go to my next presentation, questions or comments? I see, yep. So Tatiana, yes. There are many people on the spectrum who do not like person first language because of that diminishment, exactly. And yes, Krista, this is really tricky stuff. I just feel like when you can ask the other person, we should ask them, because we should provide them with the opportunity. And when we make a mistake, just like with everything else, you know, admit that you made a mistake, apologize, and try to do better the next time. Respecting neurodiversity means respecting nonverbal choices, even when these choices are weird or non-age appropriate. It means respecting the word no, whether it's spoken, signed, or shown by behavior. Thank you, Oscar. I agree with that. Any other thoughts or comments before we are perfectly timed to transition to logistics? When we know better, we do better. Dave, I don't know if that's her quote, but it's beautiful. Whoever said it, it's wonderful. And if that's not exactly the words, the sentiment is right there. And that's really what this is all about. And that's what we're here to do. You're giving me my segue, so I'm going to take it. So I have another PowerPoint that will help us look at logistics that we looked at before, which, is it going to be up here? All right, so I'm going to have to do something before I can share. Bear with me just one moment. I have to get to the right presentation. There we go. Okay, perfect. So here we are with our logistics. Let me get the slideshow. So we're going to talk now about logistical details about the study group. We are here at session 1. We're so happy you're here. Those of you who are watching the video after the fact, we're really happy you're participating. Let's talk about how all of this works and answer all of those questions. So first of all, and you all have this information, this came straight out of the emails I sent to you. There is nothing new here. But just so you can see it, and I want to go through it with you, this is the schedule of our synchronous sessions. Say that 10 times fast. Schedule of synchronous sessions, my goodness. Okay, so here we are in the top left, Saturday, March 6th. We are in the neurodiversity session. This afternoon in level 2, there will be a different set of content in neurodiversity with Jennifer Zook. She's a wonderful presenter. And as I've said before, and we'll talk about this through the slides, you can attend level 1, you can attend level 2, you can attend both of them, you can attend part of each, part of the other, all up to you. In previous years, level 1 and level 2 had the same content, just deeper and more advanced in level 2. But last year we got feedback that folks just wanted more different kinds of content. So we have level 1 and level 2, and in many cases, the content across them is different. So, and it's all available to you. You're all gonna get all the videos for all of the sessions. So it's all available to you. So that's today. So we're laying the groundwork, right, with some really solid conceptual frameworks for us to understand the work we're about to do. 2 weeks from now on Saturday, March 20th, in level 1, we have 2 presenters who are going to share how they teach students with disabilities music online during the pandemic. Miles Wilcox and Maria Adhd Velasquez, they are both staff members at the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs, alums of our graduate programs, and they are outstanding elementary general music teachers who also teach a lot of instruments. So I think you'll find that really interesting. They've developed some fantastic tools and strategies for teaching online that will also help you when we get back to in person. And the ways that they work with people with disabilities will help you wherever you're teaching. Level 2 next week is Universal Design for Learning. So we've brought in Rhiannon Gutierrez, who works for the Boston Public Schools and used to work at CAST and is a filmmaker and artist. And she does a wonderful job with Universal Design for Learning, and she'll be presenting on that in level 2. So if you don't know Universal Design for Learning, that's a really important session for you because it will open your eyes to frameworks and strategies in a new way. 2 weeks later, Saturday, April 3rd, level 1, multimodal instruction and teaching demonstrations. So now a more hands-on strategies and demonstrations. Nadia Castaño-Morin, who is a staff member at the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs and an alum of our master's program in music education and autism, will be showing the work that she does with multimodal teaching by giving lots and lots of activities for you. And then Gretchen Harry, another alum from the Master of Music and Music Education with a concentration in music and autism, is a percussionist. And she's established some really interesting practices in notation for working with students with a wide range of disabilities. So they'll both be sharing on Saturday, April 3rd in level 1. In level 2, we have Tomas Marquez, who is an alum of our master's program in music education and autism and is a member of our teaching staff at the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs. And he's going to do 2 topics with us in level 2. One is about working with music technology, and he has many creative uses of technology that he uses with students with disabilities. He works in a school for students with very high support needs in autism. And so that will be the second part of his presentation, which will be working in that setting. And you'll see some strategies that you can then apply to working with other students. 2 weeks after that, Saturday, April 17th, I'll be doing a session on assessment. Okay, great. We're teaching our students with disabilities, how do we know what they're learning? How do we understand where they're at, what they need, what to do next? So that's going to be my emphasis. And then Andrew Clark, who is the director of choral activities at Harvard University and also teaches neurodiverse choral ensembles here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but also in the summers in Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh. He's a member of our advisory board at the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs. He's got some terrific strategies and work on choral ensembles for people with disabilities, both inclusive ensembles and separate ensembles. So we wanted to get that choral piece out there. And then in level 2 on April 17th, we go for the instrumental piece. Shayna Pistilli, who is an alum of our master's program in music education with a concentration in music and autism and teaches in the Philadelphia area, has an adaptive notation framework that's different from Gretchen's, that's really interesting for you to know. And she does a lot of work with instrumental ensembles. So how do we work with students with disabilities in instrumental ensembles? Shayna will help us with that. So Saturday, April 17th is like ensemble day. 2 weeks after that, Saturday, May 1st, Victoria Laricchia, who you saw her in the video, and she's a faculty member in our master's programs and a consultant. She is a special education teacher and a musician. She is going to do 2 big topics: differentiation of instruction and behavior management. And she has amazing strategies that apply across the curriculum. And then in level 2, Krista Yadro, who is one of our consultants at the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs, is going to work with you all on music learning theory. She does some fantastic work with students with disabilities using music learning theory. And then I will work with you on special education strategies that we can translate into arts education and particularly music education. And then on May 15th, we'll talk about this, is when we're going to be working with your projects. What are those? We'll find out in another slide. So that's the layout of the session schedule. There's separate links for each one. I have sent you the links for today. 2 weeks from now, a couple days before, you'll get the links for the 20th. Videos are made, we're recording them. We will send them out the Monday afterwards, along with PDFs of the slides. So that's what it says here. So we don't need to talk about that. So if you can participate in this study group in any way that you wish. If you want to get a certificate of participation, this is what you need to do: full participation. You need to attend 18 hours of sessions, 6 3-hour sessions. Like I said, and it says here, can be level 1, can be level 2, can be a mixture of both. Can be synchronous, can be asynchronous, can be a mixture of both. So if you've got something on your calendar one of these days and you can't be synchronous, or you're asynchronous right now and you want to be synchronous, you can change up your modality. There will be between session engagement Google documents that I will be sending and sharing with you also on the Monday after each session. Places for you to reflect on your learning and for you to write questions that we, the presenters, can then respond to. And then the last thing is creating and presenting a study group project, which we'll talk about in a minute. Once we've completed all our meetings and we give a little lag time for the folks who are asynchronous, we will collect all the data and send certificates of participation to everyone who has achieved these full participation bullets. In Massachusetts, those certificates will allow you to earn professional development points. I do not know if they translate into other states, but you'll get the participation certificate and you can figure that out in your individual context. So, what is a project? The purpose of the project is to apply any aspect of something that you're learning in this study group to your own situation. We all know how this is, right? You take a course, you go to a conference, you attend a workshop, and it's awesome, but the bridge between that and your current work takes more time and more thinking to do and doesn't always get done. So we're asking you to do it. And this has been a very fun and successful part of our study groups as long as we've run them. So you might create some curriculum, you might design an activity, you might take something that you're working with and modify it or adapt it. You might develop assessments, you might try some new approaches that you've learned about and document what you notice. You might create a case study of your work with a particular student or a class where you employ new approaches. We haven't really gotten to the teaching stuff yet. Today isn't a teaching techniques day, but as you see, starting next time, you're going to get a lot of roll up your sleeves kind of work that you'll be able to apply to your own situation in some way. These are some examples. It is not an exhaustive list by any means. Here are a few things to know about projects. Projects are works in progress. So we have 12 weeks together. I am not expecting that someone is going to have a fully researched, beautifully written up, finalized project with a capital P after 12 weeks of work together, right? It's a snapshot of what you have done. You're going to take something and apply it and share a snapshot of what that experience was. So it's smaller scale. We call it a project. It is a project, but it's not a finished entity. The other thing to know about projects is that different projects have different deliverables, and what you create to document your project depends on what you're doing for your project. We're going to spend our May 15th session presenting the projects, our final 2 sessions. The presentation might be a short slideshow that you create. These are short presentations, though, under 10 minutes. A short video, a short oral presentation, we keep them brief. I will have Vicki with me and we'll be giving feedback to the projects as they're presented. If you cannot attend the synchronous session that day, but you would like your project to be presented, you can share it with me and then I'll present it on your behalf and share it with everybody. And we will also collect the projects in a Google Drive folder and share it out with everybody so you all have access to the learning that you've created. And if anyone does not want their project to be included in that folder, it doesn't have to be, but a lot of folks learn a great deal from each other's projects and creations. So I'm asking you to start thinking about your project now. So in this mythical email that really will happen, you know when I say something's going to happen, it happens. On Monday, you're going to get a link to a Google Doc where you to put just, here's something I'm vaguely thinking about for my project. It's a little early yet, but start thinking about your teaching situation. We'll keep massaging these ideas. You'll have much more to think about as the study group continues. And you don't have to have a fully formed idea, but I can respond to people's ideas. So if someone says, I'm going to write 2 years worth of music curriculum using all new strategies, I would say that's an awesome project, but it's too big for this. What if we just looked at like, you know, a 3-lesson unit, you know, or a couple of activities, right? Because we're not looking to do 2 years of curriculum here. So I can help you make sure it's not too big and help you with some ideas. And it will probably take a while for you to develop ideas, and that's fine. But the important thing is that it's meaningful to you and applies what we're learning to your individual context. So I want to open it up for questions. I think I see a couple already in the chat. Oh, people like that we're sharing. Good. So I don't see questions at this point. Are there questions about, there's one in the Q&A. Oh, Laura, don't worry. So I'm going to answer that live. I'm sending out the Google Doc for you to start thinking about your project. I would say you can still be thinking about it and finalizing the idea for a little bit now. We've only had this one session on neurodiversity. You need more material to work with. So I'm not going to give you a deadline. You must have your completed project idea here. You're going to start working on the projects too. And we'll keep talking about the projects each time. I'll save some time at the end to sort of put out there, how are we doing about that? What ideas have people been coming with? I'll share some thoughts from the Google Doc with the group. So don't worry about a deadline because it's going to come to you as it comes to you, and that's fine. If you have a group of people in the same district, you can absolutely do a project together. We've had collaborative projects that have been great. So level 1 and level 2 have different content. They're different because the sessions are different. Last year, we had level 1 as beginner and level 2 as advanced. We got feedback that people wanted more different content. So level 1 and level 2 are exciting and the content is different. Is there a project plan? You don't need a project plan. I understand that, but we don't want to give a project plan because every person's situation is so different. The project plan is think about a way to apply what we're learning to your particular context. And since that's so different, we can't really tell you. And you don't want to finalize your project May 1st, right? Because that's late. Then you only have a couple of weeks to work on it. I would say, going back to that question around timing, you want to have a pretty good sense of what you're doing probably by the beginning of April so that you have some time to work on your project. Yes, group projects from the same district, as I said before, are just fine. Multi-arts is just fine, absolutely. I'm going to say a lot of yeses, because if it's specific to your situation, it matters, and it should be your project. So I won't say a lot of no's. Project ideas can be fluid, absolutely. Put a tentative idea on the Google Doc, and if more things come to you from the sessions, it can change. You're not locking into it, you're not married to it. Like I said, you probably should have taken a vow by April 1st. Like by the beginning of April, you should know what your project is, so that you can actually have a month and a half to do the work of it, and to really make the connection. But I think in the month of March, we're just dating. We're not proposing to each other yet. How's that for a metaphor? Last call for any questions. There's more. There is no further reading beyond the study group. Now, some of you may choose a project that might include some further reading. And if that's true, I will help make it small. The point of this study group is not for you to be reading a whole lot of texts. It's to participate in these sessions, to do the between session engagement, and to do the project. So we are not going to assign you readings. Believe me, that's unusual for me. In my grad courses, my students joke that I assign a book a week. It's true, I kind of do, but not to you. So there you go. Other questions or comments? I feel like we are very good. Will there be a time for us to communicate with others from different states to see what they have in place? That's not part of this study group. So there are web resources that can give you that information. So Mrs. Van Ellis is asking about how different state laws and expectations vary when it comes to students with disabilities. It's a great thing to ask about. It's not part of the content here. I'm going to share an email list, so you can certainly email each other offline from here and have those conversations. But actually, there are web-based resources where you can look up special education laws, federal, and then state by state. So that's where I would go. Great. Last call, it's 12:18. Thank you, Dave. Very glad to hear it. I've had a blast with all of you today. A little unusual doing this from home, but you know. Shameless promotion again of the Institute, right? So these items on the bulletin board are about our arts education programs and our work at the Institute. And I want to leave you with a really fun video, which is a video of a rehearsal from our rock band a couple of years ago. So let me get to that. And it's quite short, and I think you will really enjoy it. And here it is.
Ready, call it, go.
You get the idea. I want to thank you all for your time and your attention, and it's been a great pleasure to work with you. And we will be back at 1 p.m. on a different link for level 2. And I may see you there. And if not, 2 weeks from now, watch your email on Monday. Thank you all so very much. And big thanks to Laura for all of her help. And Laura, I will see you at 12:45. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening.